to our Playwell podcast. My name is Sherry Morgan and I am the Director of Projects at Play Scotland, the national organisation for play. Today our Chief Executive Officer, Marguerite Hunter-Blair, speaks to author and early education expert Niki Buchan. Niki has 40 years' experience in early education and works internationally as a conference keynote speaker, nature pedagogue and trainer. She is a strong advocate for children's right to a quality childhood, including the right to regular play and access to nature. I hope you enjoy their conversation.
Hello and welcome, Niki, to the Play Scotland Playwell podcast series. We're absolutely delighted to have you with us. And through the great marvels of modern technology, I believe you're in South Africa and I'm in Scotland.
I'm trying to swat away the mosquitoes, so I'll try not to
love
do
it,
that.
love it. Well, it is sunny today in Scotland. It's a bit cold and sunny, but it is sunny here too. But no mosquitoes. Delighted to have an opportunity to have a chat with you today. We're really interested in a lot of the work that you do and the advocacy that you have around children's play and the importance of nature play. But just to start us off, I'm just thinking, what are your earliest childhood play memories, and did they influence the work that you've gone on to do?
Yes, well, thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be part of this. I follow Play Scotland very closely. My earliest memories definitely had an impact. I'm the oldest of 5 children, and we roamed in the neighbourhood, and we got up to probably a lot of mischief, but we also knew that if we got up to mischief at the top end of the street, those parents there knew who we were and they would report our parents. So there was always that. We had a big garden and a swimming pool and big trees to climb. So we spent a lot of time in there. I would say probably my best memories were we went on an annual holiday to Mozambique, to a place called Lorenzo Marques, which is a big lagoon. And we would meet all the campers, people, a lot of different people camping. So, these were families we didn't know, children we didn't know. If they came repeatedly, we would catch up once a year. We were trusted to be off and also to look after the younger siblings. There was never, you can't play with us or you're not welcome. It was always, we were like a gang. We even played in the water, and our parents trusted that we would look after little ones and not go too deep. I remember some of our favorite games were next to the railway line, and we used to collect coins and then put the coins on the track and wait for the trains to come to squash them, and then they would all be distorted in different shapes, and we would compare what we could still see and not see. I would probably had a problem with my children if I knew my children were doing things like that.
That's always the big question now, isn't it? Would you advocate that for children today?
No, because I don't think they've got the common sense and the risk-taking practice that we had as children. So from a very early age, we were trusted to self-risk assess. Small scale to start off with, which made us more competent maybe. Whereas I think today's children, in this very risk-averse society we are in, they haven't practiced enough. And you've got to practice to become competent self-risk assessors.
And do you think that's the culture that we live in now? I'm talking about the culture across many countries, not just the UK or Australia or South Africa. Is it cultural? Is it different parenting styles? Or is it to do with traffic? You're just different, a whole different shape to childhood now that maybe existed when you were young?
I think it's a mixture, because if you, for example, the UK and Australia and America, from my perspective, are more risk averse and more likely to say children can't do something. I also worked in Germany and in Scandinavia, and the first time I went to a Waldkindergarten, a forest nursery, I was surprised to see the 3-year-olds arrive with knives, with blades this long, attached to their backpacks. So whenever they wanted, they could sit down, do a bit of whittling, and nobody batted an eyelid. There's a much more of an outdoor culture in Scandinavia than there is in the UK. If you go to Scandinavia over the weekends or public holidays, you will see a lot of families outside with children with appropriate clothing on, enjoying the outside, going for walks, going to the park. Whereas I find in the UK, the weather's not as great, but in the UK, you often don't see many children and families out and about, especially if there's a bit of rain or the weather isn't quite as nice.
I think we're still surprised by the weather, which is astonishing, given that if anything, it's getting slightly more damp and a bit more windy. So we do seem to still be quite unprepared for the essential outdoor gear. Niki, I know you went on then to set up the Natural Learning Consultancy, and you've written some books and talk about nature-based pedagogy. Would you like to talk a bit more about that and tell us what that means to you?
Having grown up in South Africa, where there's a lot more freedom, and some of my nephews only got shoes when they were 10 years old. It was just, it's more free. And again, the parents are more relaxed with the children, although there's a perception that it's a very dangerous country. But childhood was, the kind of childhood I wanted for my children. Having grown up there and having had centres, I had 3 different early childhood settings in South Africa. I didn't need qualifications, but they were amazing places for children to be. And then when I moved to the UK, and there were all the restrictions, which obviously I had to comply with, and I did. And then together with a colleague, we started one of the first outdoor nature kindergartens. And then I suddenly felt I'm in the natural space. I'm in the space where this feels right for children. And in these places, we had children from 2 to 5 and then after school, and they were outside 80% of the day in all weathers. So even with heavy snow, and I remember my last year in Scotland before we moved to Australia, it was -20 and the snow was probably about thigh deep, and we kept losing the 2-year-olds because they would just disappear under the snow, and then you would fish them out and shake them off and put them back on their little feet and they'd totter off. So I saw that if we could do it in Scotland, then surely we could do it in more places throughout the UK. The forest school movement has had a big impact on getting more children out, but unfortunately the model that is often followed in the UK is not the same as the Scandinavian model it comes from. And there's lots more rules and restrictions for the forest school model. But it was a really good way of getting children outside. And I think background definitely has a lot to do with the fact that we spend a lot of time outside. And in Australia, I spent a lot of time supporting educators to set up bush kindies, which is basically like a forest kindy, but it's called the bush there.
I mean, it sounds fantastic. And I know that Scotland has evolved quite a bit in the last 10 to 15 years, and we have outdoor nurseries, completely outdoors with no indoor provision. Do you think it's important to have a balance of indoor and outdoor, that children can choose to run in and out? Or do you feel that just exclusively outdoors is better?
I think a balance. I think there needs to be a base where children can warm up if they're cold. I don't see nature-based practice as a survivalist exercise, where you have to manage extreme weather, because we don't want to turn children off going into nature. But when you've got plastic gumboots on or wellies on, and then you haven't got thermal socks on, and you're out in the snow, those little toes are frozen. They're not going to enjoy the experience. We always had a shelter where children could warm up. There's usually a fire going or a stove going. And even a lot of the outdoor centres have that. My grandson goes to an outdoor nursery in Glasgow, and they do have a base that they can come to with the bus if the weather, or if the children are not enjoying the outdoors, they can come back to that base. So I think it needs to be a balance.
I agree with you, because not all children like to be outside all the time. There's some you just can't bring in, and there's others you have to almost force out. But I think it's good to have the choice. In Scotland, I think, for a long time being school ready, which I know is a horrible phrase. But it seemed to mean for a long time that children had to be able to sit down for long periods of time, maybe do their shoelaces, things like that. This curiosity and creativity drive that children have didn't seem to be part of being school ready. But I often wonder about the children that have gone to the outdoor nurseries and kindergartens and forest schools. Do you worry about how they manage when they make that transition to a traditional school environment?
No, not at all. We find that the children who've been to an outdoor setting or have spent a lot of time outdoors tend to be more resilient. And resilience to me is one of the biggest factors children need to be school ready. They can learn the ABC off by heart, they can do their numbers, etc., but they can do it a week into school. Whereas building resilience, and especially at this time when we have so many children with mental health issues and parents, I think we need to focus on resilience, and just being outside builds resilience because nature is unpredictable, the weather changes. So the resilience, number one. And then also that you mentioned it, curiosity and the drive and the interest to learn. I find that children outdoors are fascinated. Something's changed, or something's suddenly wet, or it's dry, or it's blown away, and they want to know why. So, the learning and the knowledge that they gain and that curiosity about the world around them is really stimulated in the outdoors and in the natural space. But definitely my priority for school readiness is looking at resilience, because it's hard being a child in this world at the moment. I think it's harder than when I was a child.
I think you're right. I think there's so many pressures around them, and they are very aware of them. I think a lot of the parents and practitioners and educators need more support now than before. And I think sometimes we oversimplify play in a way, in that and we do support outdoor play and outdoor play provision, and our regulator is very good at managing that. But I wonder if we do oversimplify it, and just letting children play isn't really what we're talking about here, and it's about really creating circumstances that allows them to explore and be creative and take, as you talked about, risk in a very incremental way. And I just wonder how we support parents and practitioners more so that everyone becomes part of this learning, rather than, I think it's something you talk about. It's not something you do to children. It's something we need to do with children.
Yes. The parents want the best for their children. So I think very often we have to nurture the parents to bring them along. And I find parents respond really well to research. And at the moment, there's so much research throughout the world about the benefits of being outdoors, the benefits of risky play. I collect research on that as well. So if people want a handout, I can organize, something like that. But if we share that with the parents and allow them to see that actually it's beneficial for their children. And the other thing I do is we obviously write benefit risk assessments, or risk benefit, whatever you want to call it, but a benefit risk assessment on the more risky experiences. And I share that with the parents. So we give it to the parents, and they can have a look at it. And sometimes, because I do a lot of fires with children and tool work with also very young children, but then the parents can see that it's not just a fad or just a stupid idea we've had. We've actually done the research. We've done a risk assessment to see what possibilities are, and the parents might contribute. I've had parents say to me, "Oh, my child is asthmatic, and what's going to happen next to the fire?" And then I'll say, "Oh, thank you for thank you for giving me that information. I will add that to my risk assessment, and we'll make sure that she sits downwind from the fire, so that the parents are really part of that process." Having said that, if I still have a parent who doesn't want their child to participate in the end, or is reluctant, I won't stop the group from doing it. Just because you've got one or two parents doesn't mean the group needs to be deprived. And very often I'll find practitioners say, "Oh, the parents don't want us to take the children to the forest. And then when you dig a bit deeper, you find it's one or two parents, usually the ones that have got the biggest voices, that have a problem. And the educators or the practitioners personally don't really want to go in the forest. So it's a really handy little experience or a handy little opportunity to say parents don't like it. But then as soon as I do a parent evening and we talk about it, I show them images of children, they'll very quickly agree. And if they don't agree, I'll say, well, look, we're going to go. You need to inform your child that you don't want them to go. And they can stay at the centre with an educator or a practitioner or with a couple of, with other children. 9 times out of 10, those parents will say, oh, okay, just take them with you, because they don't want to be the ones to tell their children that they can't have the fun that all the other children have.
No, that sounds good. And I think you're right. Certainly in my experience, sometimes the practitioners are not so keen themselves to be out and about in all the different weathers. And obviously that means that they need to have the right clothing as well. There's a lot goes on there. And I think we have come a long way in Scotland that people do, as you talk about risk benefit in terms of, or benefit risk in challenging play. But I think also people come to recognise the benefits of being outdoors, and that it's such a good environment for children on lots of different levels, social, physical, brain development, their creativity, curiosity, and I think more and more increasingly important, their emotional well-being. And I wonder, do you think in your experience of working with young people and practitioners, do you think children are more anxious now than they used to be?
Oh, yes. When I'm talking, I'll say that when I started teaching, which is 40-something years ago, I never even heard of a child with anxiety. It wasn't the sort of thing that children would have. Childhood is supposed to be joyful. It's supposed to be free. It's supposed to be fun. But increasingly, and I think that's society, it's the constant negative news that is fed to children, whether from the TV or radios, that they constantly hear that, there's negative stuff happening. There's definitely far more anxiety. And part of that is the hurried world we live in now. And your school readiness comes into that as well. We've got to get them ready for school. And then there's all the stress about, instead of saying, they elements of nature. And nature, you can't rush nature. You can try and rush it, but it doesn't really work. So allowing children to be elements of nature where they develop and do things in nature time rather than in our adult structured, hurried times. There's a lot of adults with mental health problems and lack of well-being for exactly the same reason. So, we talk a lot about looking at flow and looking at, engagement and the creativity, where children are allowed to play so that long enough that they can get really deeply engaged, which is very healing. And a lot of the research shows it takes about 45 minutes of uninterrupted time for a child to get into the flow or to get engaged in what they're doing.
I think as adults, we find that very difficult, and we're very tempted always to interrupt and distract and add to what they're doing. I find it myself, even with my granddaughter, I have to make myself stop all of those things, because you want to suggest something else, but actually if they're just sitting there in the moment, engaged in their play and working out for themselves, we need to just let them be and do that. And it's quite tricky. And I do worry about practitioners, because they've got all these, not quite a curriculum, I don't think, in early years, but they've certainly got a framework that they're working to. They need to deliver so many things. And I was reading a wee bit of the Jonathan Haidt book about the anxious generation, and he does talk about slow learning, the importance of slow learning.
That's the engaged child, or the child who's really focused, that's where deep level long-term learning happens. And when we constantly rush things, I know for myself, when everything's rushed, I don't take much in. Whereas if I'm allowed to process, and as I get older, I process slower and slower. So children could potentially be slower at processing, and then they speed up at adults, and then at an old age you start slowing down again. But we've got to give children that time to hear, to understand, to think about it, to do it, and then to experiment with it and to test it. But often, we see they're struggling with something and we jump in with good intentions. It's usually with good intentions, but actually the harm we're doing, we're taking away all the benefits. We're taking away the learning. And in the end, they do what we call learned helplessness, where they constantly say, I can't do it, because they know you're going to jump in and you will help them. There's a quote that was apparently said by a 4-year-old when he was asked what play is. And the 4-year-old said, play is when adults stop telling me what to do. And I thought, that is exactly what it is. What play is when we really step back and don't interrupt, whether it's in nature or whether it's in the classroom, but give children the time and space and silence to work it out for themselves. I found the other thing practitioners do at the moment is that they want children to finish things. We've got to do a picture and then they take it home. Why can't we paint a picture and tomorrow we look at it again and we might want to add a bit more to it? So that everything is not instantaneous, but everything's slowed down a little bit so that every child can thrive instead of those that work really fast. They're the ones that do well.
It's so true. I'm thinking of being a parent and rushing everybody on so I could get other things done. I know you talk about high quality childhood, and I wonder, how would you frame that? Just in a few, thoughts. What are the key ingredients? If you were making a cake called a high quality childhood, what would be in the cake?
Giving children time, enough space, open-ended resources. They can be creative, so natural or recycled, but open-ended resources. Things that will invite curiosity, so that will make them curious. Things that will engage them and will also lead to well-being. So there's a gentleman called Ferrer-Levers. I don't know if you've heard of him before. Ferrer-Levers he works at Leuven University in Belgium, and he and his team were looking at what is a high-quality education and what does it look like. And they came up with this concept that if children have high levels of well-being and high levels of involvement, they will reach their true potential, whatever that is. And he actually created scales. So you can measure it. You just do a 2-minute observation of children in, different, maybe outside, maybe inside, maybe the different times of the year. And you assess their well-being and involvement. And it's a fascinating little action research project. I was involved in using the Leuven scales in Liverpool, where we were looking at raising boys' attainment. And so we used the Leuven scales for this little action research project. So I think if we create environments where children want to be and they want to dig deeper, really into it, that would be a high quality space. So that includes adults stepping back.
I have heard of the Leuven scales, but I had never realised the backstory of it. And I just wonder, how did that work in Liverpool? Did you feel it helped address the attainment gaps in a successful way? It
was a very interesting project for the teachers and the practitioners, because what we did is it was over a 9-month period. So we had certain children that we measured, but the other children didn't know who we were tracking. And then we assessed them in the third term. So they would be basically big fish in a small pond, ready to move into school or move into the next class. So we did it then. Then we did it in the beginning of the new year. So they were new in their classrooms or in their environments. And then we did it a couple of months later. And it was interesting to see how some of the children who were very confident, very settled in the third term, which children coped and which ones didn't, and how some crashed and also looking at the different ages. And I can't remember all the different scores, but it's a lovely tool to use if you, for example, want to prove to parents that the children are better off outdoors than indoors, because you could do the measurements, and so then like 2-minute measurements indoors. You could do it again outdoors. Then you can say, look, this is the difference in the scales. And then you could do it in the forest. And then you could look at where are the children most engaged. And you can do it on individual children or on a group. So you could get a general, it's just a handy tool, because sometimes people want evidence.
And it sounds like a nice way to collect the evidence, actually. And it was just making me think of my husband when he had a stroke, and he was insisting on getting outside into the garden where he was recovering. And they took his blood pressure before he went out, and then they took his blood pressure when he came back in, and it had dropped significantly. And it's just so interesting that it is so important. But yes, you're right. People look for the hard evidence. What is the evidence? And I think definitely in Scotland, there's much more attention paid to the outdoor opportunities around early years and after school provision, out of school provision. And now more attention spent looking at school grounds, because that's where a lot of children get their only play opportunity of the day. So it's great to see that a lot of school grounds have improvement programs going on.
Adventure program ideas, which is brilliant. Because if you ask, I always find it fascinating when you ask children, what was the best part of the day, or school children, you ask them, was it a good day? What is best, or what did you do today? They always come out with something that they did in the break or at recess. I've never had a child say, I had the most amazing maths lesson. It's amazing literacy lesson. It's more about what they did in their break times.
Yes.
When we did the Liverpool project, that was one of the things that we looked at as well, was the loose parts in the playground and how they were used and time that they were available.
I think it's a big issue, because just as schools are probably embracing more loose parts in the playground, there seems to be less time at break time for play to happen. And certainly, I know some of the schools that we work with in Scotland with the outdoor play and learning programme, some of the schools take on the programme because they have so many problems with children not getting on in the playground. And this takes up everybody's time at break time. And obviously one solution to that is to have less break time, and then you have less issues going on. But I think the parents were raising that they felt it was spilling over into the relationships that the parents then had as well. But once they embraced these, change programs in the playground where there was drama, arts, dressing up, sand play, mud play, running and jumping play opportunities, the head teachers feedback that the issues have all evaporated. They don't exist anymore. And the parents are happy to, you're talking about risk benefit there, they do a mud benefit analysis, I always think, where they have to accept the children being muddy and dirty for everyone to get on better. So they've done their mud benefit analysis. And I just think it's a really good thing, because I saw it firsthand, and I was actually slightly wowed by how dirty some of the children managed to get themselves. And the parents were standing around not bothered a jot. So that was great, because that does require a bit of extra effort, obviously, for parents. But they clearly saw what the benefits were in terms of social relationships and harmony in the playgrounds. It was made it a better day for their children, a better day for the teachers and the other staff in the school as well. So I think it's definitely a place that we need to pay a lot of attention to. And too many of them still are tarred over and quite useful car parks from time to time. So I think we need to undo that more.
Because the children don't get to play the way we did as children, they don't know, they haven't worked out how to sort out social issues, etc. So they need to basically start from scratch on, how do you play? How do you keep your friends? We didn't need teachers to say, stop being so bossy or be their friend or something. We sorted it out and in the right way. So children, they just were more competent in that field. And you can create lovely play spaces in, a tarmac space or a concrete playground. If you had the loose parts, you could still create play opportunities for the children.
No, I think you're right. And I think we need to pay more attention. And I think, as always, then one of the problems sometimes becomes storage. One thing leads to another issue, but overall, I think it's great to drive past a lot of schools and see that they've got the loose parts stacked up and children playing with them differently, different days. And I think that's so important. We haven't touched on a very tricky subject nowadays, which is, I think you maybe mentioned it once, but about social media and screen time. What views do you have on that? And can they play a constructive role in children's collaborative learning and cooperative learning? Or do you see them as a more sinister force?
Social media for the young ones, I would say no. But I think technology is here to stay, and the children are very competent and capable. And I think it's about a balance. So, children that have played outside on the playground during the day, and then if they go home and everybody's tired and they want to spend half an hour on the computer, that's also fine, and then go outside. It's the children that, that don't have any friends, because the only friends they've got are the ones that they meet through computer games. I think it has to be a balance, and technology is here to stay. And I think there's a lot of technology that we can use, like cameras, bird boxes, fancy measuring equipment that one can use outside that will allow the children to really take on the technology, but in a more productive way than just sitting in front of the TV or sitting in front of a device playing funny games. In Australia, I was working with school-age children with a school, and they were there was a new head teacher had just started, and she wanted to have an identity for the school, because it was a failing school. It had very few children. It wasn't doing well. So she approached me and she asked me about Montessori, and I said, well, I'm not a Montessori trained, so I can't help her with making Montessori, but I could help her making it a nature-based school. So they became a bush school. And one of the first experiences I did with the children outside is I just let them play, and there was lots of just natural loose parts. I did bring some tools, just really simple hand tools. The children were amazing. My biggest problem was to get the adults to step back and stop asking the children what they're doing or to explain what they're doing. I said, take a photograph and you can ask in the classroom, but don't interrupt their play, because every time we interrupt, it takes them a long time to get back into that flow or into that slow learning, or etc. And then with these two groups of children, they happen to be boys, very engaged, totally happy. And they created, I wish I could show you the photographs, but they created what turned out to be a Minecraft game. So they were playing Minecraft in the bush, and they were getting little gumnut seeds. And so the one group was creating the green gumnut kingdom. And they had the king, and they had an orphanage where all the little gumnuts were. So it was, and they had broken the bark into sort of rectangles and squares, which apparently is what Minecraft's about. And they created this whole kingdom. They called it a kingdom. And then there was the brown gumnut kingdom. So they were a little bit further away, and they were totally different what they were doing. But they played for a good hour and a bit, creating the two kingdoms. And again, I thought that was amazing that they could use a game that they play, that they are so fascinated with, but they can be equally fascinated in creating these kingdoms in the bush.
That's fantastic, that. And it's just lovely to see that transference, isn't it, to use one thing. And I think when you do allow children that opportunity to be creative and create their own games and not come in and take it over, and even if you think you're enhancing it, you mustn't do it, because once you maybe, a teacher or, practitioner seeing that might have lots of useful suggestions as to how to make it a better kingdom or a bigger kingdom or a happier kingdom or a fairer kingdom. But I think it is so important that we don't do that. So I think what you were saying about making sure that we don't intervene and disrupt the play is so important. And I think it's very difficult for us because we are on a time clock as adults, and we're trying to get as much out as an opportunity as possible.
If you allow them to play, then they will take ownership of that play. If you take the odd photographs without, having the iPad in their faces, but just maybe from a distance, so I've got a camera with a lens so I can take from a distance, and then afterwards, you can explore with them what they were doing, and you can say, well, maybe we should. One group I asked, the boy created an amazing sort of little house, and he made a little fire pit, and he had a driveway and a walkway with little flowers, and beautifully made. And he made eye contact with me, and I could see that he wanted me to come closer. So I came closer, and I commented on how much work he'd put into it and how much effort and how creative he'd been. And then he looked at me, and then I said to him, I wonder if you can make one like that all the children could fit in. So the shelter or the den that all the children could fit in. And then I walked away, just, hanging that there. And then, of course, I had to peep. And when I looked behind me, and I could see that he was talking to some of the other children. And he got a book out, and he got the tape measure, and he was measuring his little structure. And then he was writing down the inches and the centimeters. And then he came to me with his book with a diagram on it, and he said, what do I do now to make it big enough for all the children? And I went, I don't know. There's so much learning you can do if you really look at their play and observe their play, especially with nature and loose parts, that you can then use elements of that in the classroom to explore. So, I've built bird hides with children who were interested in birds, and where they had to work out the dimensions and the practicalities, research bird hides, and so it would include maths and geometry and the whole lot.
Everything. It sounds wonderful. So, Niki, it's been so lovely speaking to you. And I just wonder, what is it you're working on now? Are you working on a particular project at the moment? Can you share it with us?
Yeah, well, I recently moved back from Australia because I was in Scotland for about 10 years from South Africa. And then I was offered a job in Australia. So I relocated to Australia because why wouldn't you? The sun was shining. And then I've been back a year now, back in Scotland. One of the projects I'm interested in is working with the Nature Nurture group in Aberdeen. I don't know if you've heard of them, Terry and Daniel Harrison, and they developed this program for children with diagnosed trauma. So, they had a diagnosis, and what they were looking at is nature and nurture and play. And that combination builds resilience. So when they started working in schools again, they realized actually all children would benefit from that little formula: nature, nurture, and play, because all the children need resilience. The majority of children are lacking in resilience. So they approached me and said, would I work with them? So at the moment, we've got 3 conferences we're planning in Aberdeen and in Perth and in Bathgate, and then we'll probably go to England as well, where we will work with them to create this nature-nurture approach to support children with behaviour or children, just to help them become resilient. There's so many people struggling with behaviour, and I wrote my most recent book was about behaviour, and about behaviour we find challenging. But it all comes down to, the children need support, and they need, if you take them outside, you don't have as much ADHD outside. You don't have nearly as many problems if you're outside with them rather than inside.
That sounds absolutely brilliant. And it definitely is a recipe for our time, isn't it? And I think it possibly applies to adults as well as young children. And because I think we all need to continue to be nurtured in nature all our lives, and I think sometimes as adults we forget that too. But Niki, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today. Thank you very much for giving up your time. And we really look forward to what happens in this project now in Aberdeen and the rest of Scotland and possibly England. So we're really looking forward to the findings there. But thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It was lovely to meet you, and I love the work you do.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast to your preferred app. To find out more about Play Scotland, please follow us on X at Play Scotland and visit our website at playscotland.org.